Hello my friends, Hank here, and today in a much requested episode, we are going to learn how to paint up World War II German tanker figures. Panzer made easy, coming right up. Let's get into it. So, a little overview before we get to work here. The figure we're going to be painting up for this demo will be this great 1/35th scale fella from Alpine Miniatures. He's decked out in the iconic leather two-piece Panzer uniform. Should be great. But there was no such thing as a two-piece leather Panzer uniform. Interesting. When you see archival images of German armored troops from World War II, you're going to see a wide variety of uniforms. You're going to see the black wool double-breasted Panzer wraps, you'll see summertime herringbone twill uniforms, you'll see greatcoats in the wintertime, you'll see some camouflage stuff late war, but a lot of times you do see Panzer Crewmen wearing leather jackets and leather pants. What's the deal? Well, simply put, leather is great. It's durable, it's got great weather-resistant characteristics, keeps the wind out. If I'm outside and it's cold, I'm wearing some sort of leather. But also, importantly, leather has some great burn resistance, especially compared to wool. So, as the war went on, veteran Panzer Crewmen often swapped out their issued wool Panzer wraps for something a little bit better. Kriegsmarine leathers. While the Panzer Corps weren't issued leather uniforms, members of the Kriegsmarine were, namely U-boat crewmen. And if surplus naval equipment was available, tankers usually scoffed it up. So, when you do see Panzer Crewmen decked out in those sweet leather uniforms, they weren't necessarily supposed to be, but you gotta do what you gotta do, right? So, with that little bit of history out of the way, let's paint this guy up. Alright, to begin here, I've gone ahead and primed up our figure with a coat of black primer to give us a nice base to work up from. If you are new to the channel, or if you haven't seen one of my figure painting videos before, I've got my head and body mounted separately on some drywall screws with a dab of super glue to create a temporary painting jig. Easy stuff. Let's start here with our body. We're going to do something new today. Since we're dealing with a lot of black in the same material, I want to add a little bit of a bluish tint to our leathers. Let's load up our airbrush with some of this Ammo Navy Gray shader. This is a super thin shading paint, as the name suggests, and we're just going to brush a very light coat over his body. This won't be very apparent at first, but you'll see the finished effect in our final product, and you'll have to let me know what you think. If you do want to skip this part, though, you certainly can. Next, let's paint our visible skin. We're going to start by blocking in his hands with some Vallejo flat flesh. Thin your paint down with a bit of tap water so it goes on nice and smooth. Usually a couple coats here will get the job done. Next, to add a little depth and warmth to our skin tone, we're going to grab some of our Vallejo red rust wash and brush that on our hands. As you can see, this will flow into all the recesses of our sculpt to add a nice little pop to the details. Once that rust wash is dry, let's come back with another thinned down layer of our first Vallejo flat flesh color and hit the raised flat portions of our hands. The back of the hands, the fingers, the wrists. This will give us a nice simple contrast. It's a very easy way to do flesh tones. Moving on, to add a little bit more contrast between all of our black here, let's paint in his undershirt with some German field gray. Now, this bit is kind of interesting. We've got a black leather belt on a black leather jacket. What we're going to do here is take a little bit of our red rust wash that we just used on our hands and brush this in over the material of our belt. We just want a little bit on there. You can easily remove any of the excess with your brush or paint over it after in black if you need to, but what this is going to do once it dries is create a little bit of a worn leather effect like that belt has been taken on and off a million times. We're going to do the same thing with his P38 holster on his back hip there, as well as with his boots. This looks weird at first, for sure, but once this dries completely, the effect looks great. Alright, let's tackle some of our smaller details here. This figure has a nice watch sculpted in, so I'm going to pull out the face of the watch a little bit with a dot of Vallejo gold. And you know what, for fun, let's give him a wedding band as well. Why not? Switching over to some Vallejo white aluminum, let's pull out the details of our buttons and buckles. If you do make any mistakes and overpaint onto the black of the uniform, you can always come back and clean that up later, no worries. Our figure here also appears to have been decorated with the Knight's Cross, good for him, so let's paint that in with some aluminum as well. Alright, shoulder boards, let's get these tackled. Panzer Division personnel would have worn shoulder boards with a reddish-pink piping, so we'll start with that on both sides here. I'm going to make this guy a captain, since he's pretty decorated. I think that makes sense. The boards for a captain are white, so let's fill those in with some creme of ice. And the Hauptmann boards get 2 gold pips, so let's add 2 gold dots on either side. Alright. Final touches. This guy's got a smoke going, so let's paint that in with some of our creme of ice. Alright, with our body complete, let's move on to our head. We're going to use my tried and true faces made easy technique here, but before we do, let's work on this really cool bandage detail featured on this figure. Our Panzer vet has suffered some sort of minor injury and is all patched up, so let's paint in this bandage with some of our creme of ice. Next, let's block in all of our skin with that same flat flesh we used for our hands. Again, a couple of thin layers usually gets the job done nicely. We've got a little bit of hair popping out of the back of the bandage, so let's dot that in with some beige brown, or really whatever color you desire. And likewise, we're going to dot in 2 tiny little marks for our eyes using the eye color of your choice. Okay, like we did with our hands, let's add a wash of our Vallejo Red Rust to add some warmth and to accentuate our details. And to finish up his skin, we're going to add a final thinned down pass of our flat flesh over the raised flat portions of our face. If you'd like to check out my full in-depth tutorial on this technique, I will link to it right here. Next, let's clean up our M43 cap. Anything that has been overpainted along the way, we can just cover up with some flat black. And for a final bit of interest here, we can add a few little thinned down splotches of flat red to his ear to give that bandage a reason for being there, so to speak. With all of our paintwork complete, let's move on to a quick bit of weathering before we wrap up. We're first going to spray our full figure with some gloss varnish to seal in all of our work. And once that's cured, we can superglue our head into position on the body. I'm going to keep our weathering to a minimum here. Using a small amount of Flory Dark Dirt clay-based wash, we're going to just apply a little bit to his face to really accentuate the details of his mouth, his eyes, his ears. This is a water-soluble wash, so any excess you don't want on there can easily be removed with just a bit of tap water. And for our final step, let's spray our figure with some matte varnish to bring it all together. And with that, we've got ourselves a Panzer veteran decked out in some repurposed navy leathers. And here you can see in the finished product that very subtle navy gray tone we added with the shader way back in the beginning. It's just a little touch to add some variety to our black on black paint job. You can also see how that rust wash changes the way the belt and the holster sit on the rest of the uniform. Simple stuff, great effect. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, my friends, be well. Happy building. Cheers.